Okay, folks. Well, while we're waiting for our third speaker to join us, I hope you're all well. I hope if you have got sunshine where you are, then congratulations. It's not so bad down here in Bournemouth. A little bit sunny. Whilst we're waiting for our third speaker to join us, obviously we are today looking at seaside swimming. And thanks to everybody who is joining us this afternoon. Before we get on to seaside swimming, can I just remind you that the wonderful 2024 Bucket and Spade list is now open for voting. And I think that there'll be a message coming into your chat if you've not voted for that already. We have got 20 seaside experiences on the list this year, including a pool or two, which might be relevant to today's sessions. So, as I said, we have got a really swimmingly good seminar for you today, if you excuse the pun, especially for those of you who like swimming at the seaside, but maybe aren't too keen on sea swimming. Especially as the current sea temperature down here in Bournemouth is currently at around 16 degrees. Maybe it's not appealing to everybody at the moment. If we think about it, seaside resorts were originally associated with the health benefits of sea bathing. And there was a resurgence of this trend during the interwar years as many resorts developed outdoor pools to capitalize on the fashion for active leisure and sunbathing. Pools developed during this time included Cliftonville Lido, Blackpool Open Air Baths, Morecambe Super Swimming Stadium, Southport Sea Bathing Pool, New Brighton, Western Supermare Lido, Jubilee Pool, Saltdean Lido, Brightling Sea, Portobello Open Air Pool, and of course Grange over Sands, which will be our first speaker. However, by the late 20th century, and with the rise of holidays to warmer climes, the focus of swimming at the seaside changed again with the rise of all-weather leisure pools, such as the Sandcastle in Blackpool, Waves in Torquay, and the Marina Centre in Great Yarmouth, and of course, the Aqua Arena in Worthing. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything because I think that's going to feature later. Today, we have come full circle, and seaside swimming, whether in the sea or in pools, is fashionable once again. So we've been joined today by three speakers who will be diving into the deep end of swimming at the seaside. And our first speaker is going to be David Dawson, who is the trustee and secretary for Save Grange Lido Community Benefit Society. Now, David's going to be talking about the past, present and future of Grange Lido, which I believe is now the only remaining outdoor pool on the northwest coast, and one that the community up in Grange would very much like to see restored and reopened, and I can second that. So as we move over to David's presentation, can I just remind everybody to put their microphones on mute and to use the chat facility for any questions that you might have. We should have time for a question and answer session at the end of today's seminar. David, over to you.
Thank you. Just checking that you can see my screen. Good. Well, thanks for the introduction. As you mentioned, I'm a trustee of Save Grange Lido. We're a community benefit society, and our aim is to fully restore the only remaining seaside lido on the northwest coast of England. I'll give you a little bit of the history of the site, first of all. It was constructed in 1931, 32. It cost £17,000 to build. And we've unearthed some of the photographs of the construction. This is one of them. Some of them suggest very little regard for health and safety. It was run and built by Grange Urban District Council, and it was constructed because of the trend for fitness and outdoor leisure that was initially spawned by the growth of the railways in the late 19th century and then grew in the interwar years. Its design is quite interesting. We've got the sweeping terraces, focusing your eye on the diving podium in the middle, with the views of Morecambe Bay beyond the diving podium. It was designed to actually look like the stern of an ocean liner if you saw it from the sands of Morecambe Bay. And that actually worked, because for the last 3 years, we've held cross bay walks with the Guide Over Sands to raise money for our project. And each of those walks has had 500 people crossing the sands, wading through knee-deep water. The pool was unheated, filled with seawater, and the seawater tanks were underneath the terraces on either side of the diving podium. And when it opened in 1932, the admission price was 6 old pence for adults. The opening ceremony was a very lavish affair. The 18th of August 1932, attended by thousands of people with lots of dignitaries. Rail excursions were laid on to bring people from all over the Northwest. There were many, many events held: swimming races, a fashion show. The Cotton Queen from the Mills of Lancashire attended and took part in the activities. And there was also a motionless floating display, which is a precursor to what we now know as synchronized swimming. The best bit about the opening ceremony, though, was that the Windsor water woolies were there demonstrating their woolen swimming costumes. There was a mangle at poolside to help people squeeze the water out of their costumes after their swim. It remained very popular from 1930 onwards through to the 50s and 60s. This is a photograph from the 1960s. You can see the height of the diving platform there. That was, I think, about 15, 16 feet high into 9 feet of water. Our researchers uncovered that in one 15-week season in the 1960s, there were 60,000 swimming visits, which is quite astonishing. However, as you've heard, during the 60s and 70s, there was a move away from seaside and outdoor swimming toward indoor leisure centres, and the northwest coast lost seaside pools from Merseyside up to Walney Island off the coast of Barrow-in-Furness. Grange is the only one that has survived. Maintenance costs were rising. Although it continued to operate during the 70s, there was a very damaging flood in 1977, which caused significant damage to the changing rooms. The flood was so severe that the deep end of the pool, its depth rose from just under 10 feet to over 16 feet. It continued to operate until 1993. There was a 60th anniversary celebration, and at that time its opening hours were 11 a.m. to 5:30. Adults had to pay £2.40 for a swim, but if the water temperature fell below 18 degrees Celsius, that was reduced to £1.70. Suddenly, in 1993, though, it closed. The pool was apparently leaking, losing 11,000 gallons of water per day, and the council, then South Lakeland District Council, couldn't afford to maintain it, so it was closed, and it's been closed ever since. The people of Grange wanted a swimming pool, though, and through a Sport England grant and lots of donations from members of the public, a pool was opened very close to the Lido in 2004. very sadly, that was poorly constructed and poorly managed, and it closed 3 years later. It was demolished in 2011. And so for a few years, Grange had the unenviable distinction of having 2 derelict swimming pools. Save Grange Lido began in 2011 when there was a proposal by a developer to completely redevelop the site, and the pool would have been gone forever. The founder of Save Grange Lido, a chap called Phil Bradby, got the support of Historic England and the National Trust and secured the Grade 2 listing of the site. This caused the developer to pull out and left the council, South Lakeland District Council, scratching its head, wondering what it could do with the site. So from 2011 to 2017, they conducted lots of feasibility studies and surveys, and eventually in late 2017, put out a consultation to the residents of Grange, asking them what they thought of the options they preferred for the pool. None of those options included a swimming pool. And this prompted Save Grange Lido to expand. I joined in 2018. We began trying to talk to the council to discuss the future of the pool. We secured 18,000 signatures to a petition calling upon them to make sure the pool could be restored eventually. And this prompted the council to open the door to discussions with us. Those first discussions in late 2018 were quite interesting. We all kind of sat around a table growling at one another. I'm a retired solicitor, and I think at one point I even threatened them with a judicial review over their plans. But we've moved on since then. We have agreed with them a 2-phase restoration of the site. They will be restoring the buildings and making the site safe and accessible to the public. And then we will take over and raise the money we need to put the pools back. Those plans were given planning permission and listed building approval in early 2020, but a month after that, COVID struck, and that has caused all sorts of problems for the council. When planning permission was first secured for their work, they estimated that their costs would be £2.2 million, but because of the rising costs caused by COVID, that went up to about £5 million. Eventually, the work started in the spring of last year, and the completion of the first phase of the work is almost upon us. We've met many challenges. The phasing of the work caused problems. A lot of people don't quite get that it's such a big project that phasing it makes sense. And one of the other aspects that's caused us particular problems is that part of the current work involves the pool basin being filled in to make it safe for the public to use. The filling in of the basin is temporary and it's all removable and recyclable, but that's a very difficult message for us to get across. The other challenge has been local government reorganisation. South Lakeland District Council was subsumed into a new unitary authority last year, Westmoreland and Furness Council, and so we've had to work with a new team of council officers, some of whom knew very little about the project, and so essentially it's been starting from scratch again. But we're getting there, and we're pretty sure that we will be able to progress things and produce something similar, but not exactly the same as this. This is a visualization of what we hope to achieve that was prepared about 3 years ago. Chris Romer-Lee, our next speaker, is our architect, and he's designed these extensions to the main building. Design's moved on since then, in that they're now going to be single story with terraces. We are going to make sure that this site is not just a swimming pool without a roof. It's going to be an offer for the entire community. In the main building, there'll be a first floor restaurant and cafe with views across Morecambe Bay. And the terraces on the single-storey extension will enable restaurant customers to sit outside and enjoy the view. In the two smaller pavilions, we will have a gym, fitness centre, and a community space for social prescribing, exhibitions, etc. And the pool designs had to change as well. There have been numerous engineering challenges, which means that it won't look precisely like it is shown on that visualization. Because the first phase of work is finishing, we had originally hoped that we'd be able to move on to the second phase straight away, but that's not going to happen. And instead, once the work's complete, we're going to be taking over the site at a peppercorn rent from the new council. And we'll be running a heritage hub, hosting events and exhibitions there while we get on with raising the £5 million that we need to bring the pools and changing rooms and filtration equipment in and get it back to where it is so that we can just continue to make a splash. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David. And as I said before, if you have any questions for David, he will be on the call until the end of the session. So please do type away in the chat. In which case, we will move on to possibly somebody who doesn't need any introduction, and that is the Seaside Heritage Network's very own Kathryn Ferry, who is probably the best known seaside historian in the country and has written many books on the British seaside, from Beach Hut to Butlins and other things that don't begin with B. Kathryn's most recent book, Seaside 100, explored the most cherished features of the seaside in 100 objects. And her next book is on 20th century seaside architecture and will be published next year. In today's seminar, Kathryn will be exploring seaside swimming in the latter part of the 20th century. So if you like what you hear, I'm sure more of it is covered in next year's book. I'll hand over to you, Kathryn.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I've called my talk Seaside Swimming, What Happened Next? And I have to admit it's probably the unfashionable bit. Because obviously Lidos are back in a big way, and we've heard about the plans for the resurrection of Grange, which is all fantastic. And I think Chris will tell us, hopefully gets in, about the appetite for more of these around the place. And certainly we regret the loss of so many Lidos. We just heard about them on the northwest coast, but I mean, it was happening everywhere, mostly in the 1970s and onwards. But thinking about that, we rarely look at then what happened when these pools were decommissioned, because a lot of them were actually replaced. And there were compelling social, economic and cultural reasons for that, which I would argue deserve scrutiny and even some understanding. So if Lidos were the must-have seaside attraction of the 1920s and 30s, then it was leisure centres that fulfilled the same role in the 1970s and 80s. So I'm going to tell you about the move away from open-air pools to heated indoor pools and introduce you to some of the key examples in that. So according to the Historic England History of Indoor Pools, Great Lengths, written by Simon Inglis and Ian Gordon, pool building stalled after World War II. And it wasn't until around 1960 that construction began again around the country. And it's phenomenal to think that in the next decade, 197 public indoor baths were built across the country, most of them by municipal local authorities. But it wasn't a council that led the way. It was, in fact, Butlins holiday camps. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Billy Butlin built 9 indoor pools. So he had a total of 9 camps by 1966, when the final one at Barry Island opened, and they all got indoor pools in buildings like you can see in the bottom right-hand picture. So this was more than any single local authority built. They were at Butlin's holiday camps, and Billy Butlin had seen a swimming pool, I think it was in a hotel in Margate, which had these plate glass sides, like you can see in the top right-hand image. You can see some swimmers there sort of looking through the glass at the people in the cafe the other side. And so Billy Butlin called these his human aquariums. And if you've ever swum in one of these, you will be very familiar with all the ceiling ornamentation, all that adornment. And it could possibly be seen as the first instance of trying to create an alternative tropical environment that would become a selling point later on. Billy Butlin apparently thought that if you were lying on your back doing backstroke, you wouldn't want to look up at a boring unadorned roof. So he got his staff to hang this plastic greenery, parrots and seagulls from the ceiling, the roof frame of every one of his indoor pools. So quite a sort of eclectic approach, but that was typical of Butlin's generally. Anya mentioned the Worthing Aqua Arena, but it wasn't the first indoor pool to be built in this was a standalone one, but actually this opened in 1968. But in 1965, Afan Lido opened at Port Talbot on the Welsh coast, and that had an indoor pool as part of a sports centre, which was the first and the largest at the time post-war sports centre in Wales. So that predates this one, but the Worthing Aqua Arena was a standalone swimming pool. And it was the first to have a brand name rather than just being called Worthing Swimming Pool. It had this rather aspirational Aquarina name, but it didn't go down terribly well in terms of its design with the locals, who referred to it as a power station, a swimming factory, or even a crematorium, because I think of that very tall chimney there, which is not really what you want from your new swimming pool. It was built in brick and glass, as you can see in that bottom illustration, proof that brutalist structures didn't have to be concrete. It was really all about the scale and intent of these structures. And if you look at both of the colour image and the top right image, the Aqua Arena was kind of brutalist in comparison to its sedate seafront setting, towering and just not really paying any heed to the design of the Victorian terraces around it. It was actually also structurally unsound, so it had to close in 1977 for an almost total rebuild, and it has been demolished and completely replaced in recent years. In the same period, there was the beginning of a new concept of what was called an artificial environment. And this began with this structure, or two structures, in fact, on the Isle of Man. In 1965, a local architect called Philip James Lomas proposed the construction of an attraction that would save the tourist economy of the island. This was to be a space rather than a building that would encapsulate everything a holidaymaker could want in what was going to be a transparent seaside village. Now, this was a response to the impact of package holiday competition, but that was only one of the reasons, because there was a shift to day trip business with mass car ownership that could benefit resorts like Blackpool, because they're on the motorway network now, but you can't go to the Isle of Man for a day trip very easily. So that was, for the Isle of Man, that was another element that was really having a contracting effect upon their visitor numbers. So the development here at Douglas was in two parts. So it had the brutalist concrete Aquadrome, another brand name, which in the top right-hand corner you can see is the lower building at the front of the site. That was opened first in 1969, and that was run by the council. And then the second part was a £1 million solarium and multi-tiered structure called Summerland. That was leased to Trust House 40. And that was so innovative that it really attracted a lot of international attention. Both of them were built into the rocky cliff face. And you can see that in the bottom picture, where you've got actually the the cliff face is one of the walls, and that was what they did in the Summerland structure as well, so that it's sort of using the existing environment but building around it and bringing the outside in. So the as well as the local architects, a Leeds firm of Gillinson, Barnett and Partners, who were leisure specialists, were brought in, and they specified the new plastic covering on the exterior, which you can see in the left-hand image. It was sort of a prism constructed in these kind of diamond triangular shapes. And it was a material called Oroglass. The problem with this was it wasn't properly fire tested. It was a very new material. It shouldn't have been used at this scale. And barely 2 years after opening, on the 2nd of August 1973, there was a tragic fire in this building that killed 50 people. It was one of the worst civilian fires of the 20th century. And yet it's very little known. And perhaps that's because it's sort of out on a limb on the Isle of Man. But it was a terrible, terrible fire that really changed building regulations. The swimming pool itself wasn't much affected, and the sports centre was rebuilt as a safe white box. But it really dashed the hopes for the Isle of Man of kind of altering and changing its seaside offer. The partnership of Gillinson, Barnett and Partners, who were involved with the Isle of Man, with Lomas, the local architect, were actually commissioned by other councils while Summerland was in construction to come up with some equally innovative schemes. And I've got the key two here. On the left-hand side is the pyramids at Whitley Bay. And this was going to be a £2 million Riviera resort, as they build it, on these kind of interlocking glass pyramids. It was to include a tropical swimming pool, exhibition hall, nightclub and restaurants. And there was actually quite a lot of local support for this to really regenerate the town as the top northeastern seaside resort. But there was a very strident local campaign against that led to a public inquiry, and that led to the end of the scheme entirely when permission was refused. They did, Gillinson, Barnett and Partners did create a leisure pool for Whitley Bay, and that opened in 1974, which was still actually the third leisure centre in the country after Bletchley and Rotherham, so still very innovative. And when I'm talking about a leisure centre and a leisure pool, we're talking about a pool that is designed for not really for swimming. It's more for sort of relaxation, leisure use. It's the change from the sort of sports and health imperative of the 1930s to quite a different sort of this artificial environment, in which swimming is part, but the water is part of a bigger sort of manufactured environment. And all of these schemes, as you can see here with the geodesic domes that were planned for Hunstanton on the on the Norfolk coast, which also didn't get off the drawing board, they essentially rejected the traditional promenade outside, and they brought the experience of the seaside into a temperature-controlled environment where it didn't matter if it rained or if it was blowing a gale outside. You paid your money in the morning, you could stay there all day. The Hunstanton one's got palm trees in there, which were very much part of a lot of the designs, and this was extremely influential. Those two didn't get built, but Gillinson, Barnett and Partners were able to see their vision through in the Sun Centre at Rhyl, which opened in 1980. The building itself was much less pioneering and interesting than either of those I've just shown you. It's sort of a grand shed, really. So it's not about what the building looks like on the outside. It's about everything that it encompasses inside. And these two multi-views give you a sense of that. It just looks like such an appealing it must have been so wonderful when it opened, because it was so novel and different. And they were selling the great indoors, and this included Europe's first indoor surf pool, a rooftop monorail, which I think you can just see in the bottom multi-view postcard. In the top right-hand corner, you can see two girls here, just here, if you can see my mouse moving around. They're riding on the rooftop monorail. There was a tropical lagoon. This is, again, that notion of not sort of using the pool for doing lengths, but actually enjoying it as a sort of a leisure environment. Lots for children, suntan bed, restaurant, radio controlled car racing circuit, you know, and there was the restaurant things. I mean, you just need to look at the images here. The top left, there's a lady wearing a swimming costume and sort of stilettos. It's supposed to be that sort of sense that the pool is not just for swimming. This is a place where you would have a sort of social existence as well. And so this was really experimental, influential, and it was very successful at first. Another company that were really big in leisure centre design were the architects Module 2, and they did quite a lot of work around the coast. So here are three of their leisure pools. The Great Yarmouth Marina Centre replaced the open air swimming baths on the seafront and the marina bandstand of the 1930s. That opened in 1981, and it has these sort of triangular roof structures. And there's a bit in my book about how this is a kind of a new seaside style from the 60s onwards. But this is sort of signposting these buildings, these pointy features, which are quite are relatively common. And they're using new materials. So in the Cleethorpes leisure pool that was opened by Judith Chalmers, no less, in 1982. Wish you were here. There's sort of new plastic construction materials on the facades there. And then the pool interior of the Bournemouth International Centre, which opened in 1984. I don't think the pool is still there anymore, but they as you can see in that marketing for Great Yarmouth, it's the all-weather holiday for all. And the Cleethorpes Leisure Centre was dubbed as the gem of Cleethorpes. So it's the new marketing. It's trying to make older resorts appeal to a newer generation and offer something different that isn't weather dependent. And that's, of course, what happened at Blackpool too, with the Sand Castle, which was designed by Charles Smith Architects and opened in 1986, still the UK's largest indoor water park. And you can see they're using new tubular steel frame, space frame technology to create these huge volumes in there so that they can have this sort of shaped leisure pool with the massive flumes coming through, and there's shops and restaurants. It's an all-day attraction, and that replaced the 1923 open air bars on the South Shore, still very much alive and well, but replaced a Lido. There were some outdoor pools alongside these, which were leisure pools, and you'll see in these examples how much smaller they are on the sites of former swimming pools. So this one was Coral Island in Torquay, which opened in 1977. That was to replace the Edwardian Marine Spa pool. And that was leaking, and it was another one of these things that was just deemed too expensive to maintain. So in 1967, the council actually approached Sir Basil Spence and partners, and they drew up plans for this kind of leisure centre and pool, but those did not get the go-ahead. So they turned to the borough architect, Ray Banks, who created this concrete scheme of hexagonal terraces and what I think are these wonderful arches. And if you see a picture of the old Marine Spa building, that was very much full of these sort of Italian arched window openings, which I think Ray Banks had sort of used to inspire this construction. The thing was that just at the last minute, when completion was being completed, finished, the council let this out to Coral Leisure, who, rather than putting in all-weather entertainment pavilions, conference centres, they filled it with arcade games, and it became quite a different kind of commercial leisure option. The pool was a very small element of that, and they didn't maintain it in a way that the council would have done had it been left in their hands, and that was a real problem because of the concrete that really needed maintenance. So after a short time it became derelict and a bit of a white elephant, but I think it was actually a really significant seaside structure that just its potential was never really realised. The Morecambe Leisure Park was designed by Faulkner Brown, Hendy, Watkinson, Stoner, and they were responsible for the first leisure pool at Bletchley that opened in 1974. So they're kind of experts in the field. This one did replace the Super Swimming Stadium that you can see in the top left-hand corner. And so it's on the site where the Eden project is going to be built. You can see again the swimming pool of the new leisure park, much, much smaller. The architects argued that this was because people coming to attractions like this, there were always more spectators than more swimmers, and that was the case actually with the Lidos in the 30s as well. And you can see that writ large in this one, which is the former swimming pool at Weston-super-Mare of 1937. You can see the original walls are there, but the pool has shrunk down into quite a different space in 1983 when it was converted to the Tropicana Pleasure Beach. And Tropicana meant that they put in all these sort of water slides coming out of pineapples, and various other fruity delights. It did sadly mean the demolition of the original diving stage, which was a kind of concrete amazing structure of these beautiful arches. It was listed in 1982 and they still pulled it down. So the irony of these structures when we're talking about the Lidos of the 30s is that these leisure centres are mostly gone too. And so Weston-super-Mare is as well known, I suppose, for being the site of Banksy's Dismaland Bemusement Park in 2015. So we've had the Lidos, they went, and the leisure centres, and they went too. So it's sort of a cyclical thing, but I think they are worth looking at the very least. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. That was absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure we'll generate an awful lot of questions. Get there while you can before they're gone, it sounds like. Okay, so moving quickly on, we are absolutely relieved and delighted to be joined by Chris Romer-Lee. Obviously, Chris has joined us today he has many different hats. The director of the architecture practice Studio Octopi, co-founder of the Future Lidos project. He's also a keen outdoor swimmer. He's developed the Thames Bath proposal to reintroduce swimming in the River Thames, amongst other cities. And Chris's book, Sea Pools, published last year, celebrates, I think 66, I think it is, of the finest sea pools around the world. So, Chris, if I can hand over to you.
So thank you very much for having me, and sorry about the technical challenges. I'm now broadcasting from my phone perched on a book on my desk, so bear with me. Following the interest in Thames baths, my practice, Studio Octopi, which is based in London, is now working on a multitude of different public water-based projects. We've worked for the National Trust, we've worked for Grange Lido, we are working with Grange Lido and Dublin City Lido, and we've also been working internationally with in Australia on creating new swim sites in the sort of Greater Sydney area. But of course, as you can see on the screen, my main passion is tidal pools. And last year I published a book, Batsford published a book on my behalf, which captures the social history and significance of about 66 tidal or ocean pools around the world. These pools play a significant part in the history of swimming and are sometimes very overlooked. It covers most of the earliest pools, such as Lady Bassett's baths in Cornwall, which were built in 1782. at the height of the new fad for sea bathing, when it was believed that bathing in and consumption of seawater was the remedy for all ailments. I don't suggest taking that up these days. And it finishes with the most recent tidal pool, which is in Norway, which was built as part of a coastal residential development. This is one page from the book. This is Dinar in Brittany, one of my favourite pools, and it seems to capture sort of the essence of what these pools are about. This was built in 1928, along with that stunning little serpentine kiosk you can see just on the sort of top left of the pool. And the architect also designed all the change cabins, which run along the beach, just out of shot on the right, but they run round to the main beach. And are rather delightful as well. So there are three main reasons why tidal pools were built from, well, 1782 was very early, but mainly from the 1920s. Emerald Gate is a good example of one of these, and this is to do with the tide. So this Dinard is not far from Saint-Malo in Brittany, and the tidal range there is 13 meters. Which, as you can imagine, at low tide leaves not much to be swam in, and at high tide everything's flooded. So this pool you see in the foreground here is completely submerged by the tide at high tide, and low tide, well, you can see the sea in the background on the other side of the peninsula, but it goes out further than that. So these pools were often built to ensure that there was access to seawater at all times of the tide. They were also introduced in rocky coastlines where access to the water was challenging, particularly for younger or older sea swimmers. And finally, in the southern hemisphere, in South Africa and Australia, where there are an awful lot of these pools, they were built for those two reasons, but mainly because of all the nasties in the water which want to eat you. We don't necessarily have so much of a problem with that in the northern hemisphere, but back down there were sharks and whatever who wanted to eat the colonizers. So the pools were built from that. Tarlaire is a project that my practice is working on. It is probably the finest tidal pool. There's a debate about whether it is a tidal pool or not, but it's certainly the finest outdoor seawater pool in the country. Studio Octopi started work on this in 2021, and we hope to finish the first phase for the refurbishment of the pavilion in October this year. The pools were opened in 1931, and work continued at the site until about 1934. The design was by John C. Miller, who was the Berg surveyor for Macduff up on the North Aberdeen coast. The building the whole site is Category A listed, so that's grade 1 for you and me south of the border. And it's probably one of the finest examples and little altered Art Deco pools in the country. The three pools, there's a tidal pool, there's a boating lake pond, and a paddling pool, are overlooked by the single-storey tea room on the landward side of the site. You can see that on the left-hand side of the bottom left image, I suppose, is probably the best one. You can see a little Art Deco pavilion overlooking a little rocky outcrop. It's quite hard for me to point, but the boating lake was in front of the pavilion, and the tidal pool is obviously the one on the edge of the coast. The later and slightly less impressive changing rooms, which you can see at facing the pool on the bottom image, overlook the pool, but also take the brunt of the North Sea, and that's part of the problem which this site has. Like so many other outdoor pools across the UK, this attracted holidaymakers for decades. Slides, diving boards, rowboats, and of course the clean air and healing powers of the seawater are all big draws for not only the people around Aberdeenshire, but much further afield. The dawn of cheap package holidays and the Wolfenden report that stated the government should focus on indoor pools changed everything, and gradually the heavily subsidised outdoor facilities across the country were cut off and closed. And sadly, this is exactly what happened to Tarlaire. By 1995, the site had been abandoned. And it wasn't until 2012 when the Friends of Tarlaire community group, was formed, that the site was cared for again. So in flies Studio Octopi, 12 years on, and we won the bid to refurbish the pavilion as the first of 2 phases to get the site back open again. We have, as I say, we're nearly finished on this, but we've removed the later additions to the pavilion, which were a 1970s addition where you see the very elegant green box on the right, which was a shocking 1970s addition to it, and a little infill structure on the other side of the pavilion. So this presented an opportunity to extend the pavilion as well as restoring it. So we've restored the pavilion back to its precise original geometry, plus this slightly sort of shy melting into the landscape extension on the far right. So we've clad the new extension in what I call Gorson granite coloured marble, and highlighted internally with a gorse yellow joinery. The extension is designed to sort of sit within the landscape, moulding into the landscape, leaving the main building in its original colour of a slightly off-white cream colour to dominate the site, and in particular the reflections in the boating pond. The community will run a cafe in the main pavilion, and then there are a community workshop. There's a community workshop in the extension to the right. The final phase is the restoration of the pools. You can see that in the bottom left, the current state of them, which is not a pretty sight. Blue-green algae has taken hold, and we're just starting the feasibility study into how these can be restored. I mentioned earlier that whether this is a tidal pool or a seawater pool. Initially, we thought it was a tidal pool because we visited in the winter in the early days, and you could see the tide overtopping the seaward wall. However, in the summer, when there's less of a swell, you don't get the overtopping necessary to refresh the pool water, let alone the boating lake water, and that is why we're getting blue-green algae appearing there. So we're now of the understanding that we think that the pool is actually a seawater pool, so similar to Jubilee pools or Tinside, and that there was a considerable pump which circulated the seawater through both of the pools and permitted overtopping. There were scum channels around the edges of the tidal pool which took the water back to the pump and recirculated it. So I think there was quite a sophisticated system in place here. It's not immediately clear why they didn't just build a tidal pool, as in lowering the seaward wall, but that may be something to do with the geology of the site or the topography of the site. Water quality is going to be a massive challenge in the pool phase, and the future of the changing block is probably not looking too rosy. It's in a terrible state with seawater inundation. But we're also beginning to question exactly how much changing facilities you need in a tidal pool, for a tidal pool. We're this pool and the next pool I'm going to show you, both of which don't have paid entry, so they're going to be free to access. You cannot control people getting in onto the site. So it produces quite an interesting and challenging proposition in terms of the business plan. So we're going to be designing the pool, or adapting the pool, to suit a multitude of different users, local users, from the shipyard to the youth groups, to the kayak groups, to the scuba divers, which is going to be quite interesting. I'm going to whip you right over from the northeast coast now over to the west coast of Scotland. This is Saltcoats, which is about 45 minutes from Glasgow, on the west coast of Scotland. And this project we picked up on the back of the work we've been doing on the other pools, and it is another similarly fascinating construction, which just these photos I found of it are just astonishing, really. The site is steeped in history as well. It is in the late 1880s, a bathing station was built on this site, and these sites were formerly salt pans. Through the years, the popularity of the swimming site continued, and despite storms sweeping away various buildings which were built at the site, they continued to expand the buildings and expand the buildings. In 1914, for example, they had 50,000 people swim there during the season as well, so the summer season. By June 1933, they had demolished all the existing buildings and constructed what you see in the photograph here, which was nearly 100-meter long single-story pavilion with a massive roof terrace. They opened the pools as well, adapting them to what you can see in the photograph in the bottom left corner there. So a considerably large pool, and it turned out this was actually the biggest selling point, but this was the largest tidal pool in Scotland, boasting modern pavilion with changing, showers and a tea room. And it wasn't until August of 1933 that they had the genius idea of adding floodlights to the top of the pavilion, which you can see in that image, to enable night swimming, which I love the idea that my client and I are going to be night swimming when this project is finally opened again. Night swimming in Scotland is presumably something very special. Swimming galas were held here, as they were in a lot of tidal pools, as well as day trippers from Glasgow and much further afield. Attendance was often over 2,000 people a day, and then one day in July 33, soon after it opened, 4,500 people paid to swim in one day, which must have made it fairly full. By the 1970s, the decline started due to the package holidays and the construction of an indoor pool within the town. And in 1983, along with the reduction of the bathing pond's size, which is quite hard to illustrate, but they sort of halved the size of it. They demolished the pavilion, all the slides, the platforms, everything. So leaving a very rough edge to it. And here you can see our proposal for the reinstatement of the pools, or should I say the reinstatement of access to the pools. You can see how the pool was made smaller, because that sort of serpentine curve on the outer edge, the sort of top edge of the near pool, used to be squared off and meet the corner of the distant pool in the background, which so they made it much smaller. But what was interesting that in 1983, that in making it much smaller, the walls they constructed must have been of extremely high quality concrete, because they're near perfect condition still. The sluice is a bit tired, but the walls are near perfect. They also built that very strange watchtower on the corner, which is actually rather a nice addition to the site. The additions we're adding are the items in pink on the screen. So you've got various different platforms in which to, or bridges in which to access the pool. There's a long ramp, there's a couple of staircases. But I think in designing this, we've not only tried to keep it as simple as possible, but we've also realized that not everyone will be wanting to jump into this pool, and therefore it should be an experience for everyone to visit and to enjoy just being around the pool. There are changing huts in a sort of later phase, which is the sort of box on the right, and some storage as well for kayaks and whatnot. So this will be a phased construction. We're now looking to secure a few £100,000 to do the ramp and the first staircase, and then follow it up with the other pieces. This summer, the pool will be cleared out, as in it will be drained, and the community will be down there taking out all the stones from the pool. Briefly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about new tidal pools. So we're not only restoring those two in Scotland, but we're also designing a new tidal pool in Arbroath in Scotland, just north of Dundee, and on the Isle of Wight. And this is some early reference images and a sort of concept diagram, I guess, for what how we're approaching these two projects. We're seeing this as a next generation of tidal pools. The concrete for these pools, we're going to make it bioreceptive. So that it is not a smooth concrete finish, but it will have a similar pitted effect as these tiles you see in the top left-hand image. So it increases the biodiversity. So we have a biodiversity net gain. One of the problems we've got with these two tidal pools is the quantity of concrete that needs to be poured into a natural environment. Although these beaches are both heavily urbanized in the sense that habitat has been relatively damaged through development, they're still very aware that we're pouring a load of concrete into a beach. So how better to tackle this than to create a bioreceptive surface which encourages habitat growth across it. Within the tidal pool, you can see on that bottom right hand image some separate smaller pools dotted into the surface. We would like to create a tidal lab. So this would be an area of man-made rock pools and different textures of concrete, so that this could become an educational hub as well as a swimming place, so that school children would come down and have their lessons rummaging around in the rock pools, but it might also be a point of research for Portsmouth and Southampton universities, who used to come to the island regularly for its sort of diverse topography and seascapes. So we're trying to attract more people back to this location, Sandown Bay on the Isle of Wight. And finally, really important, access for all. So pretty much all the tidal pools that I have visited or know of were built at a time when access for all was not a key requirement. So any of these constructions we are now adding in, it is absolutely important that people with mobility issues or other issues, including just being nervous sea swimmers, should feel comfortable in this environment. The client we're doing this called Swim the Wight regularly on a daily basis take people into the sea who perhaps are uncomfortable or nervous about swimming in the sea because of the scale of the water, the size of it, what's in the water. So these facilities will be a wonderful place to introduce more people to the sea. The only other place I know in the world who are building tidal pools or trying to build new tidal pools is in Australia. And a friend of mine has a couple of those on the table ready to go, which is fascinating to see. These are massive challenges, of course. We've already had some conversations with the Isle of Wight Council, who don't know what a tidal pool is, which is completely understandable. So we have some real challenges ahead. We're also fully aware of the cost of these pools, and this is a fascinating aspect of it, and this is relevant for all outdoor pools, that it's so important not to just look at the bottom line cost and try and offset that across items which will benefit from these pools, such as the NHS, reducing the impact on the NHS through physical fitness, mental well-being, and indeed social prescribing. The community aspects, the importance of bringing a community together around a facility. Both of the pools we're designing will be run by local community groups. And then, of course, there is the economics of these pools, that actually in rekindling or rebuilding these pools, you increase the footfall, which leads to economic benefits to coastal towns and the regions. So my final few slides are just going to dip into a couple of my what I call my side hustles. This one is Future Lidos, which I helped set up alongside my work at Studio Octopi. We set this up with Deborah Aden, Michael, Caroline, and Niall, and which commenced, as the slide says, with a few people around a Zoom call. Deborah then submitted a wonderful application to the National Heritage Lottery Fund to build a Lido toolkit. So this is a free to access guide on how to run or how to set up and run a campaign for an outdoor pool. So I would really encourage you all to dip into this resource. It's online, it's free. All you have to do is give away your email address, but it is a wonderful insight into how we can rekindle the joys of outdoor swimming through Lidos, through tidal pools, and other ways. The toolkit is an enormous piece of work, and Deborah very cleverly has shared the link as I speak. it dips into the key aspects of how to run a campaign, which includes community engagement, business planning, environmental sustainability, advocacy, and design. Each of these sections were written by different specialists. I wrote the design section. It was hugely enjoyable to do, hard work, and it gave away all my industry secrets. So do enjoy that. Within the Future Lidos network, it includes about 40 odd campaigners across the UK and Ireland. There's a brilliant map in there which shows existing and future outdoor pools. So not only does it show the reach of the network across the nation, but it's also a handy resource in planning your holidays. Last year, we celebrated a new or refurbished series of new and refurbished Lidos opening in places like Hull and Bath. Alongside the community-led projects I've presented this afternoon, do check out the restored or currently being restored, I believe, Tyneside and Jubilee pools in the southwest. The new face of seaside swimming at Sea Lanes, just to bring us right up to date with seaside swimming in Brighton, which is a pool, a treated water pool on the beach at Brighton, which extends the ability to swim all the year round on the beach, which is a very clever little business model which is working. And then finally there's Tynemouth outdoor pool, formerly a tidal pool, with an application in to convert it into an outdoor pool. Finally, I promise this is my last slide, swimmable cities. So my most recent side hustle is this international alliance that we have put together, myself and some friends around the world, and it was established off the back of the Swimmable Cities Handbook, which was written by Regeneration Projects in Melbourne, which highlighted the international groups focusing on urban ecosystem renewal and improved access to urban water for swimming. Over the last few months, we've now completed the Swimmable Cities Charter that captures the principles of the Alliance alongside the achievable goals from becoming a swimmable city. And next week, we launch the Charter and the website and are joined by Charter signatories from coastal cities such as Sydney and New York, plus Rotterdam and Beijing, to hear about and discuss the activities in the move towards a swimmable city. Beyond this, we have a symposium planned for May 25 in Paris, the Seine being at the centre of attention during this summer's Olympics. Then we'll be looking to work with cities around the world towards achieving more swimmable cities by 2030, including London, is my hope. But thank you very much for listening, and I hope all that came across from my iPhone okay.
Came across perfectly, Chris, and thank you so much. And what a busy man you are. I'm just looking in the chat to see if anybody's got any questions. Of course, you're free to come on the mic if you have burning questions. I realise we're a couple of minutes over time, but I'm sure that our speakers will be happy to answer any burning questions that you have. I see that Adam from the Lees Cliff Lift. Hello, Adam. Yes, you're definitely on the bucket and spade list this year. Not you, the lift. He is asking about the Grange Lido's ownership. I see that David has been in the chat here. Was it always owned by the council, David? It's David.
Yeah, it was built by Grange Urban District Council. Reorganisation in 1973 meant that South Lagan District Council assumed ownership of it, and the reorganisation I spoke about last year means that it's now owned by Westland and Furness Council.
Right.
But it'll soon be leased to us.
And as a council, I mean, you're very lucky. I mean, as we said, you know, the Northwest pools, the outdoor pools were all sold off, knocked down and demolished. So, yeah, a very forward-thinking council.
To an extent, Chris knows a lot more about this as well. It has been difficult, but yes, they're working with us. It's just a pity that costs have risen so much and they can't afford to provide as much help as I think the leadership certainly would like.
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
You
I'm
will.
sure you lots and lots of thanks coming in on the chat. Let me just have a quick scroll down to see if there's anything else. Rachel is talking about Whitley Bay Leisure Pool, or Waves as it's now known. I think there might be a link to a video here as well. A rave, apparently. Who knew? Phil is asking, to what extent, if any, are water companies engaged with the issue of bathing water quality at coastal lidos and pools in the UK? And I guess this would specifically be in relation to sea pools, so it might be one for Chris.
I'm not aware of any water companies working with any of the community groups or tidal pools. I think it would be interesting actually to know how many are water testing on behalf of the community to ensure that it is safe to swim. But I'm not fully aware of any direct involvement. I think that probably the water testing is carried out by the council rather than the water companies. I just think the water companies probably sensibly don't make themselves known too often. Sorry if there's a water company online today.
I don't think they would dare, would they? on a seminar on seaside swimming, I really don't think so.
They definitely get blocked from entry.
Adam again is asking Kathryn, I think, about the demonstration of the efforts made by resort towns to innovate. Do we know if resorts are in dialogue about the challenges facing them and the solutions available to them, or was it actively driven by commercial architectural firms who noticed a gap in the market?
That's a good question, and I'm not quite sure if I've got the answer to that. There was a certain competitiveness always between resorts, so I don't know how much they were talking to each other, although I suppose the example of the Isle of Man, where the other local authorities like Whitley Bay and Hunstanton are going direct to those architects who are working on something new, that probably there was probably some discussion with councils there as well. I'm not quite sure. Definitely the two key or three key leisure firms did very well out of it, and they were taking advantage of the opportunities, but they were usually building for councils. So the Lido building in the 30s was so competitive. There's a sort of sense that probably might have been the case in the 70s and 80s too, but they were facing a completely different sort of economic outlook. So I don't know, to be honest, how much they were discussing, and whether Adam said about the British Tourist Authority engaged in dialogues about indoor leisure centres. I'm not quite sure about their involvement, if any, either, I'm afraid. So Adam, sorry, I might have to come back to you on that.
We've just had one more message to say that the 20th Century Society had a visit to the Isle of Man recently, and the remains of the building dug into the cliff can still be seen.
It can indeed.
Diving board and the tiles of the swimming pool. Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It's sad though, because Summerland sort of promised so much, and then it was just this terrible, tragic thing that local people felt very angry about, I think, and there are lots of mixed feelings. I went to the Isle of Man and did a talk about seaside architecture during an architecture festival there, and that sort of came out that they sort of didn't want to acknowledge it because it went so badly wrong, but it's an important part, and the fact that is still there, that site, with nothing having been built on it. Some people want it to be a memorial, some people want something new and fresh, and it's quite a tricky one to negotiate.
What's really interesting is the Isle of Man also had four amazing tidal pools. I think it was 4, all of which were lost as well. And it was I didn't really know very much about the Isle of Man until I started looking into these tidal pools, but it was clearly a huge holiday destination, and then just completely forgotten
Yeah, one of our previous seminars, the last seminar, in fact, if you want to catch the recording, Chris, it's on our website. It was a den of iniquity, apparently, the Isle of Man. So maybe, God knows what they were doing in those pools, to be fair.
I'll definitely listen to that one then. Yeah, absolutely.
So can we just show our appreciation for today's excellent speakers? I think we're probably all tempted to go swimming at the seaside now. I realise that Zoom being Zoom, there has been quite a few technical issues and updates amongst audience members. So yes, this session will be recorded. It will be on our website in the next couple of days. And can I just highlight to you that our next event is going to be in person. We are off for a big day out in Weston-super-Mare. Again, the details are in the chat or on our website, and that is happening in September. We will be back in November with our free online seminars as per usual. And can I just thank again our three speakers for tonight and for everybody for joining us. Thank you very much.